Hello, hello, hello. Nice to see everyone. I'm Gary. This is a run through for a talk I'm giving in London next week. So it may be a little touch and go, which I'll apologise for in advance. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm from South Wales. And I try to model my talk and slide style on Rob, but I don't do a very good job. So where Rob is really calm and authoritative and presents himself beautifully to let you learn, I tend to get really excited. And when I get excited, you will not hear a word I say. So just shout at me if I tend to get too excited and talk too fast, and I'll slow down. I'm trying to fit a 45-minute talk into a 30-minute slot, so we'll gloss over some things. I apologize. It is what it is. I work as a consultant at Rove. We're a PHP specialist. Our specialist is that when you're struggling to ship anymore for whatever reason, we come in and help you to get confidence in your product and your code base again. So if you ever need anything like that, hit me up. But I've been working in software professionally for over 25 years. A lot of the work I do is as a consultant, so I move around code bases a lot. And this is a talk about some of the conscious and subconscious decisions we make every day that maybe the subconscious ones should be more conscious. So it's called It Depends. Really, this is like old man yells at cloud the talk. These are my opinions, and I'm not trying to convince you that my opinions are right here, not at all. I'm just trying to promote people to think about these things that I'm actually talking about today. So yeah, these are my opinions, nothing concrete. What it turns out, like the reason it's called It Depends, it's like an old software joke where when you ask a junior dev what they should do, they'll give you an answer. And when you ask a senior dev, they'll always say it depends. And it's a truth for me, I find that. Because so much of the work I do, particularly as a consultant, ends up being based around compromises. Every decision we make is a compromise. And sometimes we're compromising on things without even realizing that we're compromising. And that's kind of the crux of this. I didn't generate any images with AI. Some of the images I found on Google are obviously generated from AI, and I've used them because they made me giggle. But yeah, let's just go there. So really what we are talking about is nearly everything in software is shades of gray, right? There's very few things which are yes or no answers. A lot of the stuff Rob ironically was talking about are not shades of gray. Like, yes, validate your user input. That's not a shades of gray thing. But when we're coming to making design decisions, architectural decisions, technology decisions, it's always shades of gray. There's always a compromise somewhere in the decisions that you make. And I tend to kind of look at it as if it's a slider, right? So sometimes that slider will be all the way over to one end and the decision is a no-brainer. Like there's 10% of a tiny amount of a con, but 90% pros. And if we know what the con is, it's a no-brainer. We should go with the 90% pros. Sometimes that's closer to the middle. And sometimes we don't even think about where the slider is and what the cons are of the decision we're making. So that's kind of what I'm trying to talk about today. Just to reiterate, this is my opinions. This is old man yells at cloud the talk, so please don't hate me. And the interesting part here is I will be asking your opinions on this. So there's a web app at phpuk.gh.dev where you can vote on what your opinion is on the topic I'm talking about. So it would be brilliant if you wouldn't mind testing that out for me before I go and speak in front of a huge room with hundreds of people. That would be awesome. So I'm hoping that at least somebody in the room has got the voting app up on their phone. If somebody can just nod to say that it is excellent, it is loaded. Superb. So yeah, I'll be asking for your opinions. There's a little ironic thing about this voting page, but we'll take a look at that as we go on. So let's look. I've just got a few things that I want to talk about. And the first question is, should we write our own code or should we use an open source library to solve a problem? Right, and the answer is it depends. That's kind of the joke, so it's fine. The answer is it depends. So yeah, we can take a look. People are already voting, which I love. Yay! Some people are voting. Somebody vote for, there we go. It is updating as well. Thank you, folks. So yeah, the irony here is I've just told you that every decision we make are shades of gray, but then I've asked you to vote for one or the other, right? I understand that that's not ideal in the scheme of the talk. So what we're talking about here is, would you prefer, all things being equal, to roll your own or to use a library? So if you need to introduce login into a project, Would you rather use Monologue, Composer require Monologue, or would you rather write your own? Yes, I know you can vote multiple times. I know, and I'm glad nobody's sitting there with a laptop, because as Rob has just said, rate limiting should be a thing, and is not a thing, but that's fine. So 67 people think library. Awesome. I mean, it's busier than I thought. So what are we talking about? Well, you know, we're talking about requiring generally open source projects through a tool like Composer in PHP, NPM. We're talking about, oh, look, I need to generate UUIDs so that I can obfuscate my user IDs in my API. Am I going to write my own implementation to generate UUIDs, or am I going to use Ramsey UUID, which is kind of the community accepted default for that problem? And it should be a no-brainer, right? Everyone's like, oh, I'm not going to write my own UUID generator. I'm just going to type, you know, Composer require something. And that's the trade-off that we're looking at here. People way too often do not make that decision with the gravity that I believe that it should be taken with. Because there's a number of reasons that your Composer require is not a good idea. Some of those reasons are quite obvious. You know, it's not a trustworthy package in the first place. Maybe it doesn't solve the problem in the way that you'd like it to do. Maybe we should check its GitHub page to see when it was last updated. Does it have 694 open issues, some of them security vulnerabilities? Is it maintained frequently? Like, we're all guilty of this. I would be very surprised if anyone in this room who works in PHP and uses Composer hasn't blindly typed, copied the install instructions from the README on GitHub and just pasted it down. Okay, there we go, and that solves my problem. And I'm not saying you shouldn't use Composer and install packages. What I'm saying is we should be thinking about that rather than blindly doing it. Another interesting thing to do with dependencies was the left pad incident. Does anyone remember that happened 10 years ago, can you believe? That's where, it was in March 2016, where a programmer took down all of their NPM packages after they had a dispute over, like, I guess you call them a namespace in, I don't know JavaScript enough to know if you call it a namespace, but they had a dispute where the NPM repository took their kick namespace and gave it to a company. And they just took down all of their packages. And because it's JavaScript, which is even worse than PHP in terms of dependencies upon dependencies upon dependencies, everyone who was using NPM suddenly couldn't update their dependencies. So I'm not saying that will happen with Composer. I know that Jordi and Niels, who run packages, try their hardest to mitigate against that. But again, it's like something you should consider when you're not writing your own code, when you're pulling in somebody else's code. So what's the... I mean, I'm hoping that that is not a true reflection of what I would expect in this room. I was expecting it to be like more over here for using a library. But yeah, we should definitely be thinking about those things. So question 2, and this could be a talk on its own for me, because, you know, I have opinions and I'm not afraid of speaking them. Should we use an opinionated framework, or should we make our own decisions? So 254 people think we should use an opinionated framework. A lot of Laravel fans in the room. I've got to fix that before next Friday. That's fine. That's fine. Which is why I'm here doing this, right? So what are we really talking about here? We're talking about, we're not talking about other people's opinions. We're talking about using a framework that is opinionated, that tries to encourage you to work in the way that the framework wants you to work. Great example is Ruby on Rails or Laravel. You know, they're very opinionated framework. You'll often hear people in the Laravel community talking about the Laravel way, or you should do it the Laravel way. And I'm not knocking that at all. I think that there are massive pros to using an opinionated framework for the 99% use case. You know, you don't have to think about how to architect your app. You're spending the time thinking about how to solve your business logic problems, which is the most important thing, not about which folder should I put my models in, right? That's boring things to be deciding about. It's more important for us to think about how our applications are going to work. So that is a pro. You'd like to think that those decisions have been made by a person or group of people who are smarter or more experienced than you. In my opinion, that's usually the case. People haven't made these decisions lightly, and you can trust those decisions, and you don't have to be spending cognitive thought on these decisions. It's really good benefit. And obviously, if I'm a Laravel developer and I've worked on multiple apps that work the Laravel way, I should be able to move on to another app that's been strictly working the Laravel way and work on it easily. And if I'm a hiring manager, I should be able to hire somebody who's a Laravel dev and drop them straight into my team because they'll know exactly where everything lives. The big con is either you might not agree with a lot of the decisions and you just kind of go along to get along, or those decisions have been made to solve the 99% use case and you're in the 1% that doesn't do the 99% use case, which I've seen a lot. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of votes. I love it. So we're talking about, realistically, we're talking about things like using Laravel new immediately without even thinking, oh, I've got a new project, I've got to start Laravel new. Or if you're me, because I don't believe in installing something onto my system just to install something else on my system, Composer, create project, Laravel does exactly the same thing. But realistically, that's not all I'm talking about. Like Symfony has become a very opinionated framework. It started off from a very unopinionated way where they encouraged you to use the components and the MVC in a way that fits your business better. But now it doesn't do that anymore. It's like, oh, these are the ways that we expect you to use the framework. So for me, these again, old man shouts at clouds, don't hate me. I'm not a big fan of Laravel facades. I understand that that's because I've been working in software in a time where PHP didn't have namespaces and we were really encouraged not to like pollute the global scope with these kind of things because that was just a thing that was best practice at the time. So maybe this is me being an old man. I'll accept that, but I'm not a fan of that. I'm also not a fan of like these kind of attribute approach that Symfony is using now. Like the root is this and these are the people, these are the grants you should have. I don't like it myself personally. Opinions are opinions. Everybody's got them, right? But that's not for me. And the problem here for me is the power of using an opinionated framework is if you actually use the opinions, if you do it the Laravel way or the Symfony way, that's the way to unleash the power. If you're going to use Symfony and not use the attributes, which I'm actually working on a project right now where we're doing just that. Am I really leveraging the power of that framework? Would I be better off maybe using Slim and putting a load of components in myself and building my own way to do things? I don't know. It's just a question. So once again, that's probably more like I would expect it. If you ignore the numbers at the bottom, the bar is probably more like I would expect. So yeah, I've been going 15 minutes and I'm only 3 in, so we'll be fine. So when's a good time to rewrite legacy code? This is like one of my favorite questions. So we're talking about, the question I'm asking here is not legacy versus rewrite. It's like, do you prefer working on legacy or would you prefer to be working on rewriting a code base? Legacy code, like, we talk about this. I'm going to coin a phrase that Rob has mentioned to me many times over the years. Does anyone work on what they would consider legacy code in the room? Yeah, a few. So if you keep your hands up, how old is the code base? Like older than 5 years? Older than 10 years? Older than 15 years? Older than 20 years? I win. Yeah. When you mention legacy code, right, people tend to think like, oh, I'm so sorry you're working on that legacy code base, right? Oh my God, it must be awful for you. And realistically, we use the term legacy as like detriment, as a detrimental term. So what I saw Rob Allen, and I'm going to steal this off him on stage once, saying is we should call it a profitable code base, right? So code base has been running 20 years. There's a reason it's still running now. And that's because it's making money. Code base has been running 10 years, 15 years. It's making money. And the problem we've got when we immediately turn to a rewrite is why are we doing that? There's some good reasons to be doing it. This is front of mind for me because I'm actually working on rewriting a very old system at the moment. But realistically, we should be thinking about the pros and cons of a rewrite. Like the pros of a legacy system are, it works and it's earning us money, and that's obvious. The cons may be it's running on a version of PHP that's no longer receiving security updates. The cons may be it's running on such an old version of PHP that It's really, really performance heavy because there's been big performance gains in PHP 7 and 8. And the customer I'm working for right now, when he said, "Can you rewrite their application?" my first question was why. And they had a very, very good and analytical view of it. It's costing them more. It'll save them more in server usage from the cost of rewriting it. So they're a huge, massive amount of data traffic, and they've figured out that if they can do a rewrite in 6 to 9 months, they'll earn their money back in 3 months. So they're like, now's the time to do it. So mainly about security, right? Rewriting is the best time to rewrite is today, or actually the best time to rewrite is the time where you can no longer maintain it on a version of PHP that's actually secure. That's normally the overriding decision to rewrite. So we're doing okay. We'll get to the pub. Number 4. So this is a really kind of contentious one. And the reason that I like to ask the question, when should we use AI written code and when should we use human written code? And the answer is it depends, by the way, in case you didn't know. Is because I see so many people in this industry it's like such a divisive topic at the moment. We should never use AI. When I talk about AI, I'm talking about LLM model coding agents, right? I'm not talking about anything else. I'm talking about vibe coding, Claude Code, Cursor, Junie, ChatGPT, vibe coding with an agent. And people are so divided about this. People are either, you should never use it, or you should always use it. And I'm kind of so much in the middle, in the gray area, because I feel that since I've been using Claude Code probably about 6 months, my job has become so much easier. But I work on a lot of legacy code bases, and a lot of the time I spend on legacy code bases is finding stuff. It's like, I know that this code base is doing this, but where the hell is the code? And having a tool that can actually find that for me is just fantastic. It's a tool. Right? It's the same as any other tool. I remember when I was first starting writing HTML in Notepad++, and then FrontPage came along, and everyone was saying, you shouldn't use Microsoft FrontPage, you should understand how the HTML goes together yourself, right? I feel like it's a similar argument right now. Old man shouts at clouds, don't forget, I'm not right, this is just my opinion. It's just such a useful tool. One thing I will say is there is a huge environmental impact which can't be ignored. So I will completely accept that people would not want to use coding agents because of the environmental impact. I think I salute those people. I'm not a good enough human being to be able to say that. I'll put my hands up, but it's a massive consideration in that argument. Also, honestly, as you can tell by the fact that you can vote so many times, AI wrote loads of this presentation framework for me. And it did a great job. And it also, the reason my slides look so much better than anyone who's seen me present before is because I just said, make this slide look good. And it did a great job. So it's a tool that is so useful. I do not ship production code to my customers that has been written by AI coding agents yet. I won't do that. It's a step too far for me at the moment. I'm not saying never say never, it is what it is. But that's my current philosophy is I use it as almost a pair program facility. Yeah. I just wanted to really say, I really hope that for me, this joke really is falling flat and I'm going to take it out of the real talk, but we'll gloss over it. I hope that my coding agents are less like Terminator and more like Marvin or something. I don't know. There's a joke there somewhere, but I haven't kind of figured it out yet. So yeah, and I just wanted to put it on record, on the camera, that if Skynet does happen and AI coding agents take over the world, I was the first one to say, yeah, I think they're okay. Poor. We're getting there. So question 5. This is as close to a no-brainer for me that isn't a shade of grey as possible, but I wanted to include it. Again, we've seen this 2026. When should I use Vardump and when should I install a full step debugger? The answer is it depends. Yeah, but that really pains me. So I'm glad to see people are actually finding the next button, because I was worried that wouldn't be very good for the app, so thank you. For me, in my particular job, I couldn't do my job without Xdebug, without a step debugger. But, you know, people must be used to this approach, right? What the hell's going on? Is the code even executing as far as this? You could put DD, I think, in Laravel and Symfony now, so this will be massively useful. I know that even some people have even wrapped this and given you a toolbar that allows you to var dump, and I'm like, just use Xdebug. This is the one where I will say my opinion is all the way over to one side. The pros, I mean, the difference is like chalk and cheese. Like you can, if you haven't used Xdebug, hit me up. There's my email on the bottom of every slide. I'll talk you through how to install it. It can be, like that is the con of Xdebug, is it can be an absolute ball ache to get up and running. Particularly if you're on like Docker or you're using some kind of, you know, virtualization, it can be difficult, but it's so much easier now. I genuinely think that, like, look, 79% of people are still using var dump, so that's nice to see. I genuinely think that once you've step debugged through your first script and solved your first problem, it's a no-brainer. But I still do this all the time. Like, I'm not saying you should use Xdebug for every single problem that you have, because sometimes I'm just like, I just want to see the contents of this variable really quickly, and I don't want to step debug through everything. So maybe it's not black and white, as I'm saying. There is a slider where I will use it, but I do think it's a tool that everybody should have installed. Yeah, I think Xdebug is fantastic. How are we doing for time? Right, we're doing okay. We're going to get through this. And only 41% of you agree with me. That's nice to see. Thank you. Oh, this is one of my favorites. When should I put my morals to one side and just think of the money? I mean, it depends. This is like quite personal to me. Yes, there's some nice people in the room. There's also some liars in the room. It's all good. Like I genuinely always said, I would never work for certain companies in tech, right? So, certain evil companies. An easy one for us from the UK would be like, I would never work for an arms manufacturer. Like I wouldn't personally work for an arms manufacturer. I wouldn't work for certain other companies that we know have done things like Meta. Personally, I feel like, I mean, I use WhatsApp because I'm pragmatic. That's. I wouldn't work. Personally speaking, I wouldn't work. It's a very valid question, and I really agree. I wouldn't work for like Glock, let's say, a gun manufacturer. I personally wouldn't do that. But let's be honest about it. When I say I wouldn't work for Glock, what I mean is it would take a life-changing amount of money for me to work for Glock. Because I do say that as well. I've said before, oh, I would never go and work for X. That's not what you mean, right? Yeah. What you mean is they would have to pay me for 3 months' work. Like if they paid me £1 million for 3 months, I probably would go and work for them, right? Because I wouldn't have to work ever again. Can you give it all to your... I might. We're being recorded. I'll answer that question. No. So it's an it depends question, right? And I think there appears, it may just be that I am in a certain circle of the PHP community where morals are held in high regard and people are judged for what job they take. And I hate that because I don't know the circumstances of anyone, Bob, Karen, you know, whatever. I don't know their circumstances. They may really need the money. They may have like, sick kids and they're American and they haven't got any health care, and it's so difficult. So I think it's interesting. It's interesting now that everyone in this room wants to take the money. I love it. I love to see it. But yeah, it depends, right? We can be nice to each other, and we can try and have more empathy about other people, and we can stand on our soapbox, me in particular, and say, yeah, I would never work for Meta. But like, if in 3 months' time you see me working for Meta, then please don't judge me. I'm not going to work for Meta. That's not a preamble. We're good with that. So we're going back to one tech one to finish, because again, this is something that is really, it's really fresh for me. It's the last contract I worked on was microservices. When should we use a single monolith, and when should I split out into the services? And of course, the answer is it depends. There appears to be a current trend, certainly a trend in the last 3 to 5 years of like everything should be microservices. And we're throwing away the monolith. And we're PHP developers. A lot of our foundation has been on the single monolith, has been on the Symfony apps, the CodeIgniter apps, if you go back that far, the Laravel apps. We've been building these monoliths for a long time. And there's a lot of pros to monoliths, right? There's a lot of pros. So before we move away from that, we should realize the fact that services, microservices aren't all they built up to. I just like this picture, it's fine. It's quite phallic, it's all right. Monoliths are great, and they do have problems, but we should be thinking about that when we make our decisions. Whether we should be using one single code base with one, typically monoliths will have one database and will be a big single MVC architecture. Maybe there'll be an API, maybe there'll be a web front end, and they're fantastic. There are times, for me, the preferred approach is, people do love monoliths, nice to see. For me, the preferred approach is to nearly always start with a monolith. If my customer says to me, I want to write microservices, we've already realized I quite like money. So I would say, yes, that's fine. We can start with microservices. But I would always say to start with the monolith and then move things into services as and when you hit the problem. Typically, the problems will be you can't deploy to a fast changing part of the system without bringing the entire website down. And that can be a real problem that a monolith has. And you can argue, but you can engineer around that. You can do blue-green deployments where you never bring your website down when you make a deployment. But that's a problem that can only be solved by larger teams and with specific knowledge, whereas the temptation is, we're working on the stock taking system constantly, and we're constantly evolving that part of the app, and we have to bring down the entire monolith and bring it back up every time we want to deploy a small change to that. That could be a great excuse for you to move from a monolith to a monolith plus one service, right? It doesn't have to be this whole thing. And that's I've just come off a massive project where we were writing a payment gateway that had to be these microservices. Let's be honest, every microservice should look after its own persistence, so they shouldn't share a database. That's another thing I see where it's not a microservice because you've got one database and multiple services interacting with that database. And for me, if I'm working on the login service and the invoice service, then you haven't got a microservices team, right? I should be working on one service. You should have a team or individual who is solely responsible for one service, and then you should be able to deploy that service in isolation without bringing down the whole application. So I think in PHP we're lucky because we are so request response orientated that we're really well set up for monolith applications. But I do think that we'll see this come in more and more in the future. And I've just about managed to fit, I'm 31 minutes, so 85% in favor of the monolith. That's what I would kind of expect more. Thank you very much. So I appreciate your time. Sorry about the terrible joke, but thank you very much for having me here. No, I take questions, yeah, of course. I thought we were taking time. Yeah, we can have questions. Excellent. I thought I had 30 minutes, so that's... Any questions? Sure.
What's your most controversial bit?
Can I turn off the... Can we turn off the recording for the... No, I'm joking, it's fine. I mean, there are... Yeah, you should vote... No, I'm not going to say that. No, I think that... I touched on it in the talk. I think people turn to Laravel New in particular. I'll say that, I'm pretty... Like, Laravel is so good. And who the hell wants to write a login system and a forgotten password system? And who wants to write an OAuth connector when you've got Passport? Like, the ecosystem is fantastic. But I just think people turn to it too quickly without thinking about what they are trading off. I think that, you're shipping a hell of a lot of code to production, and maybe you're only using 10% of it. And this, again, like, I'm not the oldest person in the room, but I'm pretty old, and I go back to a point where that was discouraged, partly because of the cost of hardware and the cost of memory and the cost of hard disk space, and partly because it was an attack vector that maybe you were shipping code to production. Yeah, I just feel like it's difficult, right? Because I come in and see a lot of projects where these decisions have come back to haunt teams later on down the line. But that's not the framework's fault. That's the people making the decision to use the framework's fault at the early stages. Like, let's be honest, I was one of Laravel's biggest detractors when they were when it was an early framework, because we were working on project Zen Framework 2 at the time, Zen Framework 3, Laminas now, where we were like completely opposite. And we were wrong, you know. History proves that we were wrong. Nobody ever hears of Laminas anymore, and everyone knows Laravel. But the fact was, I was a vocal, I hated the fact that there were facades that aren't really facades. They're just global accesses. But that's a position of like eliteness, really. Oh, you've called something, you've called it something it shouldn't quite be. I like to think that I'm older and I moved on a bit from those kind of petty opinions, but who knows? Any more questions, or can we go to Pab? Cool. Thank you.